I've read a lot of cookbooks over my career, and this is really extra special. It's a delight for me to be here tonight with Joyce because she is a truly remarkable woman and really one of the most important people in the food world today. Absolutely. Many of you have been here for a long time and know Joyce and from her long list of accomplishments, but some of you do not, so I just want to go over just a few of them. As a young adult, she embarked on a very promising scholastic career. She graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Smith. She became fluent in French and Italian, and then she got a master's degree in the School of Art and Architecture at Yale. So what did she do with all of that? She went into cooking. In 1965, back here in San Francisco, she founded the California Street Cooking School and ran that for 10 years. From there, she moved to the restaurant world, and she was the chef and manager of the cafe at Chez Panisse in Berkeley. And then from there, in 1984, she opened her own restaurant, which was the legendary and still much missed Square One. And what was so special about Square One, which was really remarkable for the time, we take it for granted today, but at that time, in addition to the wonderful food, it really showed off her vision as a pioneer. It showcased the food of Spain, of Greece, Turkey, Italy, the Provençal region of France, the Middle East, and North Africa. And at that time, in the 1980s, that was not popular food. Joyce made it popular. She used local ingredients, and all of those flavors basically gave rise to California cuisine as we know it today. We did not know it then. Joyce also changed the menu every day, which now we take as commonplace in restaurants, but then also was unheard of, basing her menu on what was freshest every day from the market. Another groundbreaking thing. At the same time, because that wasn't enough for her, she started on a very prolific writing career, and her bibliography now includes more than 20 cookbooks, as well as a history of contemporary food entitled Inside the California Food Revolution. It is not a cookbook, it is a must-read. That was published a couple of years ago, and it really just shows how things developed and is a wonderful portrait of a lot of the characters that we know today. She's also written dozens of magazine and newspaper articles, and I was privileged to be her editor at the Chronicle for many of them. Her awards and philanthropic endeavors are too numerous to count, but they include a James Beard Award for Best Chef in California, a Lifetime Achievement Award from Women Chefs and Restaurateurs, the Corette Israel Prize, and chairmanships of fundraisers for Meals on Wheels, Project Open Hand, the United Way, and many others. And now, just in time for Passover, which is wonderful, we have her new book, The New Mediterranean Jewish Table, which we're going to talk about. As Jordan said, and as I so agree, this book is really a stunner. And what it does, in addition to 420 plus fantastic recipes, is it uses food to really broaden our view of Jewish history, culture, and tradition. And of course, there's nothing more compelling than to learn this all through food. So, we'll start with a few questions.
I should leave while I'm ahead now.
And really, this woman is just so special. But Joyce has written, as I mentioned, over 20 cookbooks, and many of them have been about Mediterranean food and the Jewish food of Italy. So what makes this book so different?
It sounds like the start of a Seder.
That's true.
I had done the Italian Jewish book, and that was a big hit because everybody loves Italians, and I keep meeting people who were Italian Jews or Italians married to Jews, so it did very well. Then I did Sephardic Flavors, which dealt with the Jews that left Spain and Portugal and ended up in Greece and Turkey. And then I did one called Saffron Shores, which dealt with some of North Africa. But I never really got into the Middle East, to Iraq, to Jordan, to Syria, to Iran, all of whom had very large Jewish populations and really delicious food. So I thought it would be time to expand my exploration of the cuisine and also to try and discover some hidden gems that I hadn't dealt with before. And going through the original books that I did, I just sort of went through and I said, which ones am I still cooking? Which ones do I still like to make? And I kept those because some were very esoteric. They were history and knowledge, but I wasn't cooking them all the time. And then I said, okay, now let's add all the new material. So there's a little bit of old material in this book, although rewritten and potchkied with. I've changed things around a little bit, and a lot of new recipes from the Middle East itself.
In the U.S., and also as Jordan mentioned, we tend to think as Jews from two cultural traditions, the Ashkenazi from Eastern Europe, and then we kind of take the Sephardim from all of the Mediterranean. But as you show us in this book, that's really an oversimplification, which is one of the things that's so valuable about this book. So talk a little bit about the different sort of subgroups, if you will, of the Sephardim.
Yes. Okay. Well, all right. So everybody knows Ashkenazi Jews, Eastern European, majority were immigrants to largely the East Coast. And so that's the culture that most people, like knee-jerk reaction, Jewish food, yeah, it's brisket and it's latkes and all of this. And because a lot of Mediterranean Jews did not come to this country, so their food has been under the radar. Nobody knows about it. And not everything that's not Ashkenazi is Sephardic. Sephardic Jews are a specific group of Jews that were in Spain and Portugal. And when the Inquisition came in 1492, they were forced to leave or convert. Most of them left. And a lot of them, some of them trickled into Italy. A lot went to Greece. And a really large group went to Turkey because the Turkish Sultan at the time was trying to increase the population and welcome the Jews. But then the Jews that are in North Africa are not Sephardic Jews. They've been there also forever in Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, and Libya. And so they shouldn't really be lumped in with Sephardic Jews because their cooking is totally different. And finally, the Jews of the Middle East, in Iraq, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iran, they're Jews that have been there since biblical times. Those are called the Mizrahi Jews. So in Israel, as a shortcut, they divided up into Ashkenazi and Sephardic because all those other Jews report to the Sephardic rabbi. But it is really a misconception because the cuisines of those three Jewish communities are not the same at all. They're very different.
Can you tell us a little bit about
Well,
each
it's
one
the
and how
seasoning, the seasoning.
palates?
All right, so starting in Spain and Portugal, not a lot of big spices, some herbs. Moving up into Italy, a little cinnamon, a little nutmeg, basil, mint, a little bit of mint. But then as they move into Greece and Turkey, all of a sudden oregano, dill, a whole other series, a little bit of allspice, turkey, again, different flavors, pomegranate, different fruits being cultivated. And then when you get into North Africa, it's like a spice riot. I mean, of all the different spices that are used. And then when you move to the Arabic countries, they're not so much spicy as they are, well, like in Iran, they use cardamom, they use turmeric, a little cinnamon, a lot of rose water kinds of things. The other countries, too, they're not only spicy, whereas Tunisia has the hot mouth. I mean, those are the Harissa people. So when you think about it, when you look at a recipe, like I was looking the other day, I had chickpeas and I had beet greens because I'd been to the farmer's market. And I have two recipes in here for greens and chickpeas. So there's the Sephardic one with onions and sort of mild. And then there's one from North Africa, which is a spice riot. It's the same recipe. It has onions, chickpeas, and greens, but one of them has preserved lemon and it has all these other spices. So one is a little more sedate for people that don't want to makes things that exciting. And then when you've done that one, hey, move on to the one from North Africa. But I like to see that a recipe can take its personality from the country of where the people are cooking. The other thing is the communities are different. The Ashkenazi community was a very closed community. They did not mingle so much with their neighbors. They felt threatened, and they felt the way to keep their heritage alive was to not let anybody in. Whereas the Sephardic Jews and all the Jews that moved around, they were much more open communities, and they went to the market, they talked recipes with people. If you're looking at a Jewish recipe in Turkey, it looks like Turkish food, even though I have Spanish recipes that are very, very close, but I see where the spices changed. And Italian Jewish food, it tastes like Italian food. It's not going to be brisket and latkes. It's going to be something else. And as you get to Iran, I mean, it's a whole other world. This smothering of greens and beautiful spices and the fruit and meat sauces, which really started in Iran and then made its way up into Morocco and eventually Catalan, Spain. So when you see these things, how do they get there? Well, through trade, through moving around. But they're all of a piece. They just change their spices and certain techniques as they get to another country.
And you use that in your book, the phrase, geography is destiny.
Well, sure, but depending on where you are, things are grown differently. So if you're in Eastern Europe, you're getting a lot of potatoes, meat, root vegetables, but you're not getting a lot of vegetables, you're not getting a lot of greens or herbs or legumes. So when you move to the Mediterranean, the vocabulary expands incredibly. And I think, everybody in this country knows that the Mediterranean diet is a good diet. But what they haven't done is made the connection Mediterranean Jew. I mean, to them, Jew is still the brisket people. And there's this 420 recipes from Jews in this part of the world that you should take into your kitchen because it's going to liven things up. And also because you're in California. And California is a Mediterranean country. Everything that is grown in the Mediterranean is grown here. And a lot of spices that you couldn't get years ago, you can get today. I mean, I for years, I've been in the city a long time. I used to shop at Hague's. It was our Middle Eastern store. And I was really upset when it closed. And then I realized, my God, what am I going to do? I need al wadi tahini. I put up al wadi tahini online, and Amazon had a 6-pack. And I thought, pretty damn good, There's nothing that you can't get today. There's no excuse to say, well, I can't make that because I can't get it. I mean, I was in Calmart the other day. They had sumac from Whole Spice Company. You can get everything. And I think more and more people need to be cooking at home because it sort of keeps your family together. And it's also a beautiful thing to do, working with your hands, tasting all day long. I mean, they talk about mindful eating, but nobody talks about mindful cooking. Cooking is sort of a meditation. If you really get into it and you take the time to do it, you come out of it sort of relaxed and mellow and pretty high, actually, because it's a beautiful thing to do, to feed other people and to taste and to just be involved in working with your hands. It's keep cooking, just keep cooking.
Well, and I'm glad you brought this up about California because that's one thing that, is so compelling about this book for us here. It is just the ingredients, we can get them, the fresh produce, and I think more and more of us have that mindset. But it's true that, as you just said, a lot of people, these are not necessarily quick 30-minute meals. Most of these require a little bit more time, but it's still possible to work them into your schedule. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, actually, because this is home food. This isn't restaurant food. You're not going to need any weird equipment. You won't need a water bath, and you won't need a blowtorch, and you won't need any strange equipment. A lot of it is stovetop cooking because for many years, these homes did not have ovens. They brought things to the communal oven. So there are a lot of things that are done on top of the stove. And then also there are a lot of things that can be done ahead because you know that you can't cook on on the Sabbath. So many things were made on Friday and could sit at room temperature and be served the next day. So for people who like to plan ahead, cook ahead, there's a lot of wonderful stuff in here for you to do. I just think that a lot of them are fast and easy, but sometimes you want to coddle a vegetable around and braise it slowly and maybe let it take on a little color. A lot of it will cook by itself. You don't have to do anything. Once you've got it in the pot, it's going to do the work. The other thing is that there are a number of recipes in here for condiments, like you're going to be eating the Moroccan cherry tomato conserve tonight. Well, even if you're making one of those pathetic boneless, skinless chicken breasts, you put a little bit of Moroccan cherry tomato conserve on that, and guess what? You actually have a really delicious dinner. So there are things that you can make. And also, haroset is not only for Passover. I make a big batch, and I use it like a chutney during the year with roast chicken or a lamb chop or anything. So think more broadly. You can be in a rush, but I make tahini sauce ahead of time, and there's a recipe in here for fish with green tahini where parsley and cilantro is pureed with the tahini. So and then if you made some roasted asparagus or roasted carrots, you can use the same sauce there. So again, you can get multiple uses out of just a good sauce that maybe is with one recipe, but guess what? Works another way.
Those are really good tips. These recipes, we talk of them as being Jewish recipes, and yet they were developed in these other cultures that were clearly not Jewish. So what makes these recipes Jewish?
Okay, the thing that makes the recipes Jewish is that they have to follow the kosher laws. If you're in the Middle East and you get a lamb kebab, it'll come with a yogurt sauce. Well, that's a no-no for the Jews. So that's where tahini comes in, or some of the mayonnaise-based sauces. If you're making moussaka in Turkey or Greece, and it has that wonderful cheese and dairy topping, that's a no-no. You have to find another way to do it. Either you do an all-eggplant one and have the dairy topping, or if you do it with meat, you make what's known as a fake bechamel with broth and flour and a little oil, and put that on top to seal the top. So you won't find any shellfish recipes in here. You won't find any, obviously, pork, God forbid. But there are a lot of recipes that look familiar to you. You're going to look at some of them and say, well, hummus. But hummus, do you know that in the tombs of the mummies, when they did excavation, there were chickpeas in their tummies? These are foods that go way, way back, a lot of the pulses, a lot of the legumes. And, we're reading about hummus now like it's the hottest thing ever. Mike Solomonov was here making hummus, and it's a new Israeli food. Well, no, this is an ancient food. A lot of these recipes are around since before there was an Israel, okay? There were Jews before there was an Israel, and they were cooking at home in the countries where they were living. So I think it pays to look at these as being part of a long tradition, that you're not just sort of being trendy and making hip Israeli food, It's great that the Israeli chefs are getting some press because it's made people aware that there were Jews in the Mediterranean and they had a cuisine. And so it's been sort of like the foot in the door. But these recipes are traditional and go way, way back. They're really part of a very old culture.
So let's talk a little bit about that, maybe about how you put this book together.
Okay.
And because it really is quite comprehensive.
All right. Actually,
talk about your process a little bit.
Well, this starts, I have to say, back to square one, because when I had square one, every year Passover would come, and a lot of customers would say, we don't want to cook for Passover. Will you make food? And because we were a Mediterranean restaurant, I didn't want to just be making matzo balls and chopped liver, even though I happen to like them, but not the healthiest diet to eat 365 days a year. So I said, all right, well, I'm going to have to do a little research. And because I had lived in an Italian Jewish home, I knew that there were tons of Italian Jewish recipes, and I had a pretty big library. And I've been collecting books. I probably have 2,000 or 3,000 books at home. And I started researching a lot of the traditional Jewish food from these other countries. A lot of Moroccan Jewish cookbooks were written down mother and daughter. Same thing in Algeria and Tunisia. And and they're in French, so I can read that. And I read a couple in Spanish before the Jews made it over to Greece and Turkey. And then I was in Turkey, and the old age home had put together a book that I used for my research. And Nick Stavroulakis did a book on the food of the Greek Jews, and also another book with a woman who was Turkish, who was a lapsed Jew who eventually re-Judaized herself. Another interesting story. But so I had a ton of research in front of me. And every time I'd meet somebody from another country who would then tell me they were Jewish, I would ask about what their family cooked. And that's how over time, you sort of collect these recipes. So at Square One for about 9 years, every Passover, we did a week of Jewish food from around the Mediterranean. And you could also take some home for people that wanted to buy it. We did make matzo balls and chopped liver to take home, I think. I don't remember now all of it. But it was an education for people. I mean, we would have an Italian Jewish Passover meal. We had a Moroccan one. We did a Sephardic one. I mean, people were really learning, and that's how I learned, doing the research for the restaurant.
So when you decided to do this book, how long did it take you to put it together? How did you went back and, excuse me, cooked all the recipes? How did you?
It always takes longer you think it's going to take. First of all, with a university press, they are like demons for detail. They send it out to peer readers, even before you start to write it. Like, what do you think about this idea? And then you get a report back, and then you start to write it. And then after you've written it, and it gets edited and copy edited and copy edited and edited, then it goes out to peer readers again. And
what do you mean by peer readers?
They're people that the university press picks whom they think know something about this food, to see if I have mistakes or, ask questions. Well, this one didn't get so many questions. Inside the California Food Revolution was like a nightmare of questions, because they would ask a question before they got to the chapter that answered the question, so I get it in the middle. But with this one, there weren't too many questions, and my friend David Tanis said, just don't make it too academic, even if it's university press. Warm it up. So I kept trying to do that and keeping my language in there so that it just didn't read like a school book, which is, then I don't want to put you to sleep. So it took about 2.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, usually, you can do a book that's a simple book where there's not a ton of history. Like if I do for William Sonoma a book on beef or fish or something, I can do that one in 6 months, because you've picked 50 recipes, you've cooked them 1,000,000 times, bang, a book. But with this, I mean, we had people checking the Ladino spelling as opposed to the Turkish spelling, as opposed to this spelling, and going back and forth. And Sharon Silva, who's my copy editor, who is a genius, by the way, just amazing. Well, she's the detail queen, so she's always going to ask questions. And Dory Brown, my editor, another perfectionist. So when you work with people like that, you want to do an even better job, Don't want to let them down in any way.
Well, I mean, the scholarship really shows in the book. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so valuable. I know that I spent a lot of time with the book, and I cooked a few things from it, all delicious. And I learned something, and not necessarily just about the recipe, with every recipe, not just about cooking. I mean, I learned, a little tidbit of life somewhere else in another century. And I think that's really what's so compelling. For example, one of the things I was really fascinated with, and Joyce and I talked a little bit about this, there's a story of the Donmei Jews.
Yes.
Am I saying that right? The Donmei Jews, there's 2 recipes in here from the Donmei Jews. And one of them is a saffron rice pudding called zerde, and another called asure.
Yeah.
So let's hear a little, because I never heard of the Donmei Jews ever.
Well, I have actually more recipes from the Donmei Jews, but those 2 head notes, I talk about them. And actually, it's in the mid-17th century, there was a whole Messiah movement taking place in Europe. And Sabbatai Zevi, who was born in Istanbul, announced that he was the Messiah and was excommunicated, but he had followers that stayed with him for years and years, and they were like, they followed like the ecstasy movement. They were whirling dervishes, and they became Muslims. They Muslimized their food, and eventually,
And they became Muslims in practice too?
many of them became Muslims in practice, but over time, when they went back to Greece, a lot of them ended up in Salonika. They had Jewish practices at home. But what had happened is they stopped following the kosher laws with the food. And the only reason I know about this is that Stavroulakis, who used to be the curator of the Jewish Museum in Salonika, wrote a book with this woman named Esin Eden, who was Turkish Jew, who ended up back in Salonika. And he wrote this book in the 19-somethings. I don't know. It's in the bibliography. And I'm reading about these people and looking at the recipes, and she was a really good cook. You can tell when you open someone's book whether you're going to like their food or not. So I started taking some of her recipes and re-koshered them, like where she had chicken broth, well, I took out the butter, or I would add vegetable broth, but I put back the kosher laws because her food was really delicious. And the name Donme means convert or sort of turncoat, but when they moved back to Salonika, they called themselves the Mamin Jews, which were the faithful. So it's just a little bit of information like that. You start thinking, wow, when you think of the Marrano Jews in Portugal, people that didn't convert but claimed that they did and kept their Jewish practices, and people could tell that they were still Jews because they didn't cook on the Sabbath. So they got found out. But this one was just sort of a part of a crazy movement, and it sort of all fell apart probably in the 1800s. But the tradition, if this started in 1676, this movement, and he wrote this book in the 19-something, these people were around for a long time, and they forgot who they were. Very interesting food to me.
Really interesting.
The other thing that was interesting when I was doing my research is the whole citrus trade was run by the Sephardic Jews. When you see a lot of recipes called Portugal, which means basically anything with oranges will be called Portugal, that's Portugal, because in the Middle Ages, the Arabs brought all of the citrus fruit from China and planted it in the Mediterranean, and the Jews, because they needed the etrog for Sukkot, they needed that citron, they became a lot of the cultivators of the citrus fruit, and then also became the merchants that had the fruit travel around. So you will find lots of recipes using oranges, and oranges and almonds, but a lot of recipes where the oranges are cooked and then pureed and added to food. And all of the citrus stuff is really thank you to the Jewish merchants. They were responsible for that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And now obviously in Israel and throughout the Middle East, the whole thing with the orange groves.
Right, oranges, yeah.
With oranges, the Jaffa oranges. Eggplant is another.
Oh, that's another interesting.
Is another ingredient that kind of.
All right, so eggplant came from India and was introduced by the Arabs to the Mediterranean countries. And when it first appeared in the market, Artusi, in one of his books about Italian Jewish cooking, said only the Jews bought it in the beginning, eggplant and fennel. They were too different, but because the Jews were poor and these were cheap, they bought them and they cooked them. And then in Spain and Portugal, in the Middle Ages, they used to cook eggplant with sugar because it's a fruit. So they would fry it and sprinkle sugar on it. And so I was sort of following the whole trail of it. The sweet eggplant is still cooked in Morocco. There's a wonderful Moroccan recipe in here that is used to break the fast at Yom Kippur, which is called baranya, which is like an eggplant cooked with honey and spices. And I've done it a couple different ways so that you can do it either ahead of time or a la minute. And then the eggplant is used in so many spreads and dips. I looked in the index and eggplant had 2 columns because the Turks have already 500 ways of cooking eggplant. So when you really start looking into it, eggplant is an extra. And they used to preserve it in a syrup, like a jam. And the other thing is rhubarb is like the other way. Rhubarb, which we think of as a fruit, is really a vegetable. And in the Middle East, it's used in place of lemon and things. So they cut it up and use it in a soup. And it has that tartness that lemon does. It's interesting how it. moves around.
Yeah, that is real interesting. And one more that I really saw a lot of through the book is sauces with nuts in them.
Okay.
Like pulverized nuts and...
That's part of the Arabic cooking tradition. And a lot of the nut sauces, like the mahamra that has the walnuts, or the scordalia that will have almonds, all of those nut sauces, and we have a whole bunch of them in here, walnut sauces too, for fish and meatballs. They're part of the Arabic cooking tradition. And actually, the Arabs brought almonds also to Spain and Portugal. And I'm not sure about hazelnuts, but I know they brought the almonds. And then they used it as a thickener. A lot of bread thickened sauces, too, are part of the Arabic tradition. And see, you have to realize that Spain and Portugal at one point was Jewish, Christian, and Muslim. And that was called the convivencia. And they all cooked together and talked about food. So a lot of the Arabic food made it into Spain and Portugal, and when they finally got to Turkey with the Ottoman Empire, they already had a slightly Arabized palate. They had already been working with some of those flavors. There's also double cooking, which is Arabic.
What cooking?
Double cooking, where they either fry something and then bake it. I mean, we'll see a lot of things where something is fried, and then it goes into a casserole and goes in the oven. So that's also part of that tradition.
Of the Arabic tradition?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Pretty amazing.
It is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the Jews of Iran, since that has been a pretty closed society to Americans, and just our knowledge of what's gone on there with the Jewish community and what's left, because I know you went to Iran not too long ago.
Yeah, I was there a couple of years ago.
Before the treaty, or the...
Yeah, before the treaty. Well, I years ago when we first moved here, we were very good friends with a couple from Iran who were architects at Harvard, and we met them, and my former husband worked with them. And I used to cook with this woman, Laleh. She came from a family of 18 children.
Oh my God.
Her father was an Iranian doctor. Her mother was an American nurse who married him, and then he married a second time, married an Iranian woman. And so there were a bunch of her family here in this country, and we used to cook. And so for years I cooked Persian food, but I know it was her family's food. That was the taste I had in my mouth. And then I've met some Persian Jews. I mean, Los Angeles is like, they call it Tehrangeles for a very good reason. When the Persian Jews left, a lot of them ended up in Los Angeles. So I've been down there tasting food, going to the markets, and I had an opportunity to go to Iran a couple of years ago with a friend of mine, and I wanted to eat the food there in the country. I wanted to see if there were regional differences, because I was just working from what I knew and what I had tasted here. I wanted to see the vibrance of the pomegranate. I wanted to see how the food looked on the plate. And so it was a wonderful experience for me to be there and taste it. I mean, and even notice, like fesenjan, which everybody knows is the chicken or duck and the walnut and pomegranate sauce, which you must make because it's so delicious. But in Isfahan, it was sweeter. They have a sweet tooth. Where you went north, the walnut sizes got a little bigger. That's where they grow the walnuts. So I could even trace that through my travels. And that made me feel a little bit more confident about putting these recipes in. I mean, you'd go to the market, they smother things in greens, and you can buy bagged fresh greens or bagged dried greens, even in Persian markets here. So a lot of things are cooked with a little bit of beans and then this avalanche of greens that cook down. And I have about 4 or 5 recipes of those because they were just beautiful. And walking through the market, you could smell all these herb, you're just led by your nose to see what everything is. So I didn't want to put in food that I hadn't tasted there. It just seemed important to me that I do
And were
that.
you free to travel around and to talk to people? And
We
go
did
in their
talk to
homes?
people, but you can't go into people's homes as Americans. I mean, there may be other people that did. If you're an American group, and we were small, we were only 8 people, and there was one other American tour group in Iran that we met from, I think, geographic expeditions, and there were a lot of Northern Californians. we had a guide, and he was responsible for us. He would lose his license if we went into someone's home, for example. He would get in trouble. But when we'd go into a city, if we had an hour to roam around, he'd just sort of let us loose. We could go shopping. People would come up and talk to us all the time, all these young girls in school telling us that they were studying engineering and how they wanted to go to graduate school here and could they practice their English on us. Families that we'd meet that would invite us for ice cream. We may be the great saint in politics, but to the people, absolutely not. I mean, they were really happy to meet us. But, you're prescribed as to where you can go. There were French tour groups, German, Italian, English, and there are certain hotels where tourists are allowed to stay. So we'd be following, like 1 week we were following the Italians, another week we were following the French. And because they're near the monuments, they're near the mosques or, some of the ruins that you want to see. So it's not like you're just roaming around on a bike in the country. And I'm sure they watched us, I mean, I don't think they were unaware of our presence. But everybody was really very welcoming and lovely to us. So
that's great. And you were able to taste the food.
Yes, that was that was why I went. I went for food.
Israel, you mentioned briefly the Israeli chefs, who some of them are getting a lot of press now, but what about the food of Israel that you're seeing now, and does it embody some of these trends since there are so many cultures there?
Well, Israel is like the United States. It's a melting pot. So you can get German Jewish food, you can get Russian Jewish food, you can get Italian Jewish food, Moroccan, and then all of the Arabic food of all the people that are living there. And I think that certain dishes become trendy in Israel, like shakshuka. It's really Tunisian, and I have the Tunisian version in here, and then I have a little Israeli version. But it came from Tunisia first. The hummus is really Arabic. It's not Israeli, but the Israelis have adopted it, like falafel. A lot of these are traditional dishes that people are coming to know, so it's a good thing. That's Mediterranean Jewish food. But it wasn't invented by the Israelis. Certain dishes are more popular there. There's a very spicy Libyan fish that they seem to love. I'm glad that Ottolenghi came out with his book, because that opened people's eyes to other aspects of cooking. The Jerusalem book, though, is largely Arabic food. There's shellfish in there, there's meat with dairy sauces, so there's still a lot of Arabic food in that book. But it sort of opened people's eyes to the beauty of this food and the diversity of it. And I think it is a diversity that I appreciate so much. When I was growing up, I grew up in Brooklyn, in Crown Heights, which was essentially a shtetl. I mean, we were Jews for blocks and blocks around. And it was a very limited diet and a lot of meat and potatoes. My father died at the age of 47 of a heart attack. A lot of my friends' fathers started dying 39, 40. I work with Dr. David Eisenberg, who's at Harvard Medical School. We do food conferences. His father died at 39. This was not a healthy diet if you ate it every day. It's great to have brisket once a year, to have latkes, to have schmaltz. I mean, I love making gribenes for my family once a year. But if this is your regular diet, it's not good for you. Where the beauty of the Mediterranean diet is that you've got all those vegetables and grains and legumes and fruits and small portions of meat. Meat is like a flavoring. It's not the center of the plate. Fish, if you catch it, poultry, the eggs were more valuable than the chickens for a long time. So it's a really healthy diet. And I think all Jews should be eating this way, and every once in a while have a ceremonial Ashkenazi meal. I think that's fine. Do it every once in a while, but don't make it your regular diet. And that's what made me want to adopt and broaden this cuisine for my family, and certainly at the restaurant, because I'm in California. I can get figs, I can get dates. I mean, you go to the farmer's market, you're following the seasons. Everything is fresh and local, which is the way it was in the Mediterranean. There weren't refrigerated trucks. There wasn't air freight. You went to your local market or you went to your garden and you made the food. It was fresh. It was seasonal. It was local. That's the way it's supposed to be, I think.
Okay.
Okay.
Passover. Now that you mentioned
yes.
the brisket and everything, it is coming right up, and a lot of us will be cooking for it. So,
All right.
what's going to be on your Passover table, and what's in here that we might be able to use?
Usually I've been doing sort of partly Ashkenazi because of the family's love of gribbinus and chopped liver and matzo balls. But I also make the Turkish lamb with green garlic. Green garlic is at the market now, so if you get the book, be sure to make it while the green garlic is in season. It's beautiful. There's a lovely chicken with apricots that I make. Also, all the spring vegetables are here because Passover is a spring festival. And so asparagus are here, artichokes are here, favas are here, the new little carrots are here. There are a number of recipes of vegetable medleys, favas, lettuce, and artichokes, or artichokes cooked with citrus, because citrus is sort of still here, and the artichokes are coming in. And so I like to make the artichokes cooked in citrus juices that are just beautiful. The Sicilians do it, and the Algerians do it. And also the Italians do a wonderful lamb stew with artichokes and egg and lemon. That's just beautiful. They use usually capretto, they use goat, but since we don't have goat at our market all the time, you can use lamb. There are a number of wonderful Passover cakes in this book. A lot of the nut torts, the hazelnut one, a Greek, that's Italian, a Greek walnut tort, and then an almond and orange tort, which is just beautiful. And so you'll find lots of, and also fruit. I mean, right now we're getting to the end of citrus, so while the oranges and things are still here, you should make the orange compote that's in the book because they won't be here soon. You should take advantage of it. And strawberries are starting to come in, so usually you're so full after the Seder, you want to die. So I usually just do a little sliver of cake and strawberries with a little blood orange juice and a teeny bit of sugar. So that's sort of a lighter ending so that you don't end up on the floor. But the Passover cakes are good all week. You see, that what's nice about the nut cakes is that the one with the almond and the orange is actually better the second and third day. So that's another good one to do. And that's one where the orange is cooked and pureed and then folded in with the almonds and the eggs, and it's really, really delicious.
And harosas. There are almost a dozen harosas
yes,
recipes in this book.
From all different countries, cooked and not cooked. But they're not just apples and walnuts. There's dates, there's bananas, there's figs, there's all sorts of dried fruits. Because it's a really diverse condiment, and I think it shouldn't just be for only Passover Seder. I think it's a really good thing to have in your fridge. Bring it to room temperature and serve it. It's good with cheese, too.
And condiments, and we're going to have some outside. Is your next project?
Well, I'm working on a preserving book, and hopefully we'll get that out in the next year or so. I follow the season. So right now, rhubarb has just come in. So yesterday I did a rhubarb, blood orange, and rose jam, and one with rhubarb and strawberries. And later this week, I'm going to do rhubarb and carrots because they're coming out at the same time with orange, like a marmalade, and a rhubarb, orange, and ginger. And then I did a rhubarb chutney. Then I'll be done with rhubarb. Then the strawberries will be here, and I'll move through. I mean, I've been doing these for years. It's not like it's trendy. I've been making preserves since the 60s, and but I'm getting better at it. That's the thing that's good. The more you do it, the more refined it is, and you have a different take on it. It's not just, strawberry rhubarb jam, wake me up. No, I wanted to try something a little different. So I took dried rose petals and pureed them with the sugar. And it's because rose water evaporates. You put it in, you taste it for a minute, and then you put it in a jar. It's gone. So I wanted to keep that in there. And then because the rhubarb sometimes can be greenish, the blood orange juice makes the jam the most beautiful color. So I'm always looking at something in it, trying to look at it in a new way so that when you eat it, was like today you're going to be having the Moroccan cherry tomato conserve with some goat cheese and crackers. And in the old days when I made it with brown sugar. But now I've switched to white sugar because you can see the color of the tomatoes better. I didn't want to bury them. And that way I can do it with yellow cherry tomatoes or red cherry tomatoes, and you still see the color of the fruit. So the more I do it, the better it gets. And you're also going to be having some membrillo, which is quince paste, both of which are, by the way, for sale at Buy Right. I should put in a plug. So if you like it, you can always get more. But membrillo, I learned, well, first I did it the traditional way, where you peel and core the quince. The quince are so hard, and you cut yourself, and they're tough. And so I was thinking, how else could I approach this? And I have this book, a Sicilian book written by this woman who was raised in a nunnery who made sweets. And she has a shop in Erice in Sicily, Maria Grammatica. And I wanted to see what she did, because in Sicily they also make quince paste. It's called cotognata. And she boiled the fruit whole in the peel and then pureed it afterwards. I thought, how smart. Instead of beating myself up and cutting and peeling, the only time I cut it up and peel it is if I'm making sliced, that's another couple good recipes there. I make sliced quince slices that I have in my preserve cellar. So when I want to make chicken with quince, the Algerian recipe, I just cook the chicken and then I open a jar of my quince slices and throw them in, or lamb with quince, which is the Greek one. But making the membrillo now, I have it down to a system. And so every year for Buy Right, I make about 325 pounds of membrillo as long as the quince are here. And when I was in Iran, the quince tree, because the quince came from Iran, and I've seen our trees, and I have visited up near Mendocino and Philo is the apple farm, and they have I get quince from them. They have 6 different kinds. But in Iran, I saw quince trees the quince were like footballs, and the trees were so laden. I was like speechless. I had never seen quince like that in my life. And then you realize, I want to say thank you to them for getting it to Europe, because what an extraordinary thing. Anyway, it's a beautiful perfumey fruit. It'll be at the markets in October, November, December. Just get some, put it in a bowl in your house. It will perfume your entire house. It's a magnificent, magnificent smell. So I don't know. I think we've probably tantalized you.
I think so. I think so. So I think we have time for questions for Joyce. Jordan's going to pass the mic around if anybody has questions for her on her Jewish cookbook or any of her other really interesting activities.
Any questions? Oh, here we go.
Hi, thank you very much. This has been fascinating. I have a question. We have vegetarians in our family, and when it's Passover, do you have any idea for a main course for a vegetarian?
Yes. First of all, you can base it on legumes if they're not Ashkenazi Jews, if they are more broad-minded and will eat legumes like white beans or lentils. White beans and greens, which would be good. There are a number of vegetable stews in here that are, the one from Trieste, the carciofata, that has potatoes, carrots, mushrooms, artichokes, asparagus, everything, the kitchen sink, and herbs, and very filling. But I think, there are also some beautiful layered matzah pies that are done with vegetables that will be fairly filling and a good centerpiece for the meal. And, of course, all the desserts they can have. Yeah, because this is a very vegetable-friendly diet. I mean, a lot of Jews barely ate any meat at all. I mean, a lot of Jews in the Mediterranean were pretty poor. So meat was like for festivals, a special deal. Most of the time they were vegetarian. They weren't vegan, but they were vegetarian. So,
Next question here.
About every Middle Eastern country claims to have invented phyllo dough. Did you find use for it in your cooking?
Yes.
Where did you source
basically, Greece and Turkey, every country makes it. I mean, it's made by hand. It's not machine made. And we used to have a company here, Scheherazade Bakery, out in Noriega and 20-something. They're no longer there. But for Square One, I used to drive there once a week and buy fresh phyllo, which was like silk. You could feel it. It was so beautiful. Now you have to get it in the freezer case. But I have a number of Greek and Turkish recipes, a lot of the borekas, some of them that are shaped like coils, filled with vegetables as well. I even made up one that I did at Kwesa for our fundraiser for Sunday suppers. I did a smoked eggplant borek because we had a lot of eggplant at the market, and that recipe's in here. There are also, like, if you can do it with butternut squash, anything that you can layer. We have a lot of them in here. Desserts as well. Wonderful baklava from Istanbul, which uses the pureed orange in it. And a syrup. That's it. So you, instead of it being so sweet that you can't stand it, you get that little bitter line of flavor in there.
Wow.
And you can add nuts or not. But yeah, you'll find lots for phyllo. Delicious recipes.
Thank you.
Do you have a recommendation for olive oil, please?
For olive oil, well, I think you should get California olive oil. We have some really good oil now, and a lot of it's even at your supermarkets. California Olive Ranch, Corto, a lot of the wineries are making special olive oil. California is actually doing one of the better jobs. There's less corruption. If it says extra virgin, it is extra virgin because the standards are very, very high. McAvoy, all of those oils are beautiful. A lot of the oil that you're getting from Europe right now, I don't know if you've been following all the olive oil scandals, but things that will say from Italy are not, and some of them are not extra virgin, but they say they are. It used to be that the standards of the International Olive Oil Commission were a lot stricter than they are now. And if you get it from a winery where you can see the pick date and the label, and it's, you know, from a specific place, it's probably fine. But a lot of the bulk olive oil that says extra virgin, it's a virgin like I'm a virgin, okay?
Question up here. I have a question on how to navigate through your cookbook, because I often find a side dish or a main dish that I really like to cook, and then I don't know how to actually pull a meal together. So, any
Okay, well,
ideas on that?
fortunately, we have a very good index. Second of all, follow the seasons. Okay, so right now, I'm going to be at the market on Saturday. I'm going to be roaming around getting stuff. And I'm going to get what looks good and bring it home. Then I'm going to go to a book and I'm going to look up artichoke. Or I might get some white beans from Mr. Jacopi that he's dried. Or I might get some rhubarb from Swanton out front. And then I'll go home and I'll go to the index of a book, not only my book, but other books too, and say, rhubarb, what are we doing with it this week? Or artichokes. I think, I start vegetables first. I'm one of those people. And then I think, okay, I maybe walk by the fish stand, look at what he has. And then I'll think, okay, I've got fish. I mean, next week for the Chronicle, we're going to be making the fish with the rhubarb and tomato sauce. And it's beautiful. It's Greek and Turkish. It's basically Sephardic. And so if the rhubarb looks pretty good, hey, I might do that. There's also a lentil soup in here that has a rhubarb. I might decide I want a soup supper. But I start with the vegetables. I always have in my pantry all kinds of dried beans. I've got lentils and white beans and you name them I have, and chickpeas. And then if I buy beets, I'll keep the greens, because that's why I ended up with greens and chickpeas this week. I made hummus for myself for a nosh, and then I had some extra chickpeas, and then I had the beet greens from the market, so I made the Algerian one. I didn't make the mild one. But I think you have to figure out how. I don't make multiple courses. I'm by myself. I make one meal. It better be a good one. Go with my wine. And if I have company over, I usually still look at what's at the market in season, so that I can focus on the fruits and vegetables, and then fill in with the protein, because our protein is around all the time. But I like to celebrate our season. And I mean, just going to a market with a shopping list, sometimes something's on your list and it doesn't look very good, so you have to punt. So if you start with what's there and then fill in protein later, if you want it, you can do that.
Next question.
Hi, I have a question about freezing some of your recipes. I don't eat out during Passover, so I have to cook a lot ahead of time. And wherever I am, I have to bring my own food. How do some of your recipes freeze, or they should not be frozen, or?
Okay, I am not a big fan of freezing because vegetables lose all their texture. They just turn to mush. Certainly some soups can be frozen, especially pureed soups. But anything where texture is important, you're going to lose it. You can freeze a meat stew if you've made one. You can probably, I wouldn't freeze moussaka. No, I think a lot of it was not meant to be frozen. And so that's sort of unfortunate. But see, I don't think most food was meant to be frozen either because of loss of texture. And I mean, in my freezer, I keep nuts, I keep things that can spoil or go rancid. I'll keep broth. But I won't keep a lot of prepared foods because they suffer in the thawing. You can make like little pastries that can be frozen, and then put them in a bag after you've put them on sheet pans. If you have enough space, a lot of pastries can be frozen. If you did certain things in phyllo or in a dough, you have a good chance there of those holding up. But as far as vegetable dishes, I'd say not a good idea. I mean, if it's the only option you have, that's your option, but it won't be the same.
After, a while, being half Sephardic and half Ashkenazi, I get tired of matzo and chopped liver and...
I understand.
And things like that, so...
But I think you can also find some vegetables that are a little hardier, like butternut squash. If you did a phyllo thing with butternut squash, that squash would probably hold up a little bit better because it's more dense, especially if after you've cooked it, you've drained it and gotten the liquid out of it, and then do it. Artichokes, if you haven't overcooked them, the hearts might stay firm. The leaves will be garbage, but the hearts might hold up. It's just a lot of it won't make it, just texture is the whole deal.
Question over here, to your right.
Yeah?
Hi. A friend of mine recently suggested a curry called vadavan to use in cauliflower soups and other things. I've seen the name, but I was not familiar with it before.
Okay, vadavan is a made-up spice mixture made by some of the spice companies. It's a curry spice. It's not used so much in Mediterranean cooking, but it became fairly trendy with chefs a few years ago. And it's a nice seasoning, and it's a little better than most of the bottled curry powder, but it wouldn't be in this pantry particularly.
What do you think? Do you know what it is comprised of? Because
it has onions. It has pieces. Their pieces are fairly large. Mm-hmm. It'll have bark, cinnamon, and cumin seed, and all the rest of it. It's a little bit like ras al hanout, where you can get it in big pieces, or you can grind it up and use it. For me, for the vadavan, I would grind that up a little bit because I find the pieces stick in your teeth and they don't get tender. No, I mean, they're. I remember bringing back ras al hanout from Morocco. Now there's a wonderful company in Napa Valley called Whole Spice Company, and they have ras al hanout in pieces and also in a ground spice mixture. So you can buy the pieces and grind it up when you need it. Just have a spice grinder. And the vadavan, I would say also, I would break that up a little bit.
Really, because it's also used as a curry, and I used it in cauliflower soup. Mm-hmm. The first time I used it, I barely got even a curry flavor, so I doubled the amount the next time.
Yeah.
And it's got a real peppery taste to it. It's very good.
Yeah, no, it is good. It's a nice mixture.
Thank you.
Just
Next question over here.
Mediterranean.
Yeah, hi. The product that you find at the ferry building is pretty nice, but I find it very pricey. Are there any less expensive alternatives that you would recommend?
Well, I mean, a lot of the supermarkets have organic produce. See, for me, it's important that the stuff isn't sprayed with pesticides. So even the organic food in your average supermarket will be more money than the regular one because it costs the farmers more time and labor to give you that. There are other farmers markets, but the Alemany market, which is less money, is not all organic. It'll be cheaper. But if you care about having your food unsprayed or cultivated in a responsible way, these farmers are not laughing all the way to the bank. It's a lot of work. And maybe if you eat less animal protein, which is expensive, and eat a little more vegetable and then pad it with legumes and grains, I mean, bulgur and rice and all those things, you'll get a better meal. But I don't begrudge them what they're charging for their food because I know the effort to which they go. I know how carefully the food is raised, and you get what you pay for. I hate to say it, but that's true. Whole Foods is not a bargain. Calmart's not a bargain. Bryan's is not a bargain. You get the organic stuff, you're going to pay a little bit more. If you don't care about it, then you can shop at the Alemany Market or any of the other supermarkets. But to me, that's important. I don't want my food to be sprayed, especially things like berries, where the soil is just poisoned with chemical. You're eating the berry, you're eating that stuff that they sprayed on there. So, if it's one thing, if you can peel it, maybe, but basically anything that's important, you don't want it to be sprayed. So, you get what you pay for. Sorry.
Other questions for Joyce? Anyone? One final question? Oh, okay.
If not, they can go eat.
As there's intermarriage, as this lady said, she was half Sephardic and half Ashkenazic. Are there foods that are hybrids of the cultures?
Are they hybrids? Well, I mean, if I'm thinking of latkes, okay, there are pancakes of zucchini and other vegetables that are fried in the Middle East. You could call it a squash latke. You could call it a latke, but basically, if it's a zucchini one, it's called muchver and it's Turkish. You could call it a zucchini latke, A lot of foods are stretched with potatoes and vegetables because of thrift, and they're latke-like. There are noodle dishes, but not really kugels. There are some pasta dishes. Brisket as a cut of meat isn't cooked as a big braise, but as a cut of meat, because it has marbling, it certainly would be used in stews. There are meatballs from all over the world. And actually, I could have done a whole book on ground meat in this book because I've got meatballs from all over the Mediterranean, lamb and beef and chicken, and even little fish ones. You could say that the Tunisian fish balls are like gefilte fish, but they're infinitely tastier, I got to tell you. So there are forms of cooking that will look familiar to you. I mean, the Italian Jews make chicken dumplings, and the Persian Jews use chickpea flour instead of matzah meal to make their dumplings for the chicken soup. So you could say it's a crossover, but they operate independent of each other. The matzah pies are mostly Middle Eastern, Greek and Turkish, Sephardic. I'm sure that there are Jews making matzah pies who are also Ashkenazic, but the recipes that I have in here are Sephardic. Anything with fried matzah, there are omelets that use matzah that are soaked and broken up. You could say it's matzah brei, but it's not really. It's closer to a frittata. So crossover. I guess that's the way you'd look at it, as a crossover. It's sort of, the form is familiar, but the recipe is different,
All right. One more question.
Okay.
Do you have a rule of thumb on how long to keep dried spices? You hear all these rules about tossing them after 6 months. Are they like prescription drugs that really last longer?
Yes, they are like prescription drugs. First of all, I recommend getting spices from a spice company, Spice Ace, Whole Spice, and buying just what you need. You can buy just 2 ounces. You don't have to get a big jar, and use it and then reorder. They ship to you or you can pick it up. Most spices in the supermarket, you don't know how long they've been there and how long they were in their warehouse before they even made it onto the shelf. So I think spices are something that you should buy by mail or on the phone, or go to the store and get them and buy the smallest amounts possible, unless it's one that you know you use in quantity. I go through cardamom and cumin seed and cinnamon like there's no tomorrow. Other spices I don't use as much. And so I just order a little bit and then I reorder. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Oh, everything's back there. Thanks.
We have Joyce's book for sale. She'll sign and some snacks out there.